What's up, everybody? Welcome to Draft Chaff. This is episode number 171. My name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts, and joining me, as per usual, Ben Fisher. What's up, dude?
Not a lot. Glad to see you survived your wilderness adventure. How was it out there?
Oh, it was phenomenal. I'm exhausted, but it was phenomenal. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the It's a Fairy Tale section, but it was really awesome.
You might say you've returned from the wild or braved the wild.
And I'm not dead after all.
Nice.
Before we jump into today's topic, though, of course, our usual housekeeping. Do check out the Discord if you're not already in there. It's the best place to be to chat all things MTG. You can come say hi to us. We've got a great community of aficionados over there. It's completely free Discord server, so do check that out. The link to that is in the episode description as well as on our Twitter page. And if you'd like to support the show directly, you can do so through Patreon. That's the best place to support the show. Huge thanks to everybody who continues to support us over there, whether you've been doing it for 1 month or 24 months. We really appreciate all the support we get over there. Big changes coming to Patreon, so we're not going to list out all the perks and stuff. That's kind of under construction right now, but more on that as we kind of get the details solidified and come up with a new launch date.
Yeah, that's going to be great. Patrons, by the way, you look good today. You do something new with your hair? Maybe? New like cologne or something? Keep it up. Good work. You see, it pays to be a patron. You get free compliments.
All right, on to our Cracker Draft type thing. Ben, what do we have this week?
All right, we've got a pack one, pick one for us here. Nothing too fancy, just I think we got a good handle on the format by this point. So let's see what we think. First out, we got Merry Bards. I haven't minded this one. I mean, it triggers Celebration. It's a little better than I thought. I mean, it is kind of a 3-mana 3/2 vanilla, but it's more on 4 mana that it does something. So it's a little bit flexible. It does stuff in your curve, and Young Hero roll is pretty good. It can put the Young Hero roll on anything, so it's not bad on itself. But really, where Young Hero shines is on something like a Ginger Brute or a 3/1, and then or even like a cheap flyer, like a fairy token, and then it can get out of control.
Yeah, definitely not something I'm looking at first pick, but I agree. It's a nice middle ground card for most red decks.
Stormkeld Prowler, the 2-mana 2/1. Whenever you cast something mana 5 or greater, it gets 2/1/1 counters. 2/1/1 counters is kind of big, but I haven't really felt like this is doing it. Like, what's the joke that it can trade off in the early game? I'd rather play that what is it? That wolf, like the 2-mana 2/3 as like a defender with higher toughness. This doesn't really do what those 5-mana value decks want to do, but I can see this getting big sometimes. I've seen this grow up to be a 6/5 before. Then again, if we're going to be playing those go big decks, I'd rather just take Root Rider Fawn our next card. This card's awesome. 2-mana Accelerant. It's a 1/3, blocks pretty well in the early game. It even can fix your mana with that fixing ability. Love it. This card is great for the splashy decks, and you certainly can splash in this format.
Yeah, we're coming to learn that more and more, I think, and the Root Rider Fawns do a good job of enabling that. So I think so far that's what I'm on, but we'll see how the rest of the pack shakes out.
Same. Next up is Wicked Visitor. That's the 2-mana 2/2. When an enchantment is put in the graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life. This one makes me sad because this is one of the vectors that just did not get there at all. This one, the tapping one, to some extent, even like the 4 power matters one, like so many vectors in the set whiffed, which is a reason why it's a little lower on my list of sets recently. I think this is the worst we've had in a while, to be honest, but it's still, decently playable. It's just nothing to write home about. And this Wicked Visitor, I mean, in a slightly different world where the knobs are twisted slightly differently and this vector is stronger, this would have been a solid 2-drop. It almost reminds me of a Siege Zombie, right? That one, which ended up being an awesome recurring drain engine in like the blue-black zombies deck from a while back. This seems to fulfill a similar role, like a 2-drop. You get on the board early, you start draining out, but this one just like I've seen this proc like twice maybe.
Yeah, I've never seen it proc, so.
We've got Spell Stutter, not Spell Stutter Sprite, but the thing itself. Yeah, good counter. I'll play it in a blue deck. Better if you have a lot of fairies, but you can play this even like a blue-green deck and you just need something to do on turn 2 to keep yourself from dying. Hollow Scavenger's next. That's the 3-mana 3/2 wolf. You can sack to Nantuko Husk, a food, I guess. But
Sort of.
Yeah, sort of. Limited to once a turn. You have to pay mana for it, so it's pretty tame in comparison. But it also has the Bakery Raid. That's the 1 green make a food. This one's pretty good because it lets you bargain early. I mean, just having like a bargain thing on turn one, you're usually not doing anything else on turn one unless you're casting like wilds or whatever. So I guess you can just do this on turn one and then you're set to bargain for a while. Maybe even with something on turn 2 or 3, like a Diminisher Witch to slow their early aggro. So I like this one. It's pretty solid in green decks. You rarely cut it, that type of thing.
You're not taking it over Root Rider Fawn though, are you?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm on the Fawn over this. I just love the acceleration too much. Rhyme for Reindeer. Man, they really screwed over my elk here. I mean, this thing is like it's at the intersection of two vectors, neither of which are good. Although it being a 4-mana 3/4 that's bad does make it a great inclusion in my elk commander deck, where we look for only the worst of the worst. And this guy, I think he might have an honorary spot in that deck soon. You just can't. This just doesn't really happen. There's better things for the white aggro decks to do to clear away blockers, and the tap deck doesn't really exist unless you literally have Hilda. So no thanks. Feed the Cauldron, though. This one's pretty solid. The 3 mana destroys something mana value 3 or less. Mana value destruction stuff is limited, and there's a couple of them in the set. The Witch's Vanity is another one. That's the Saga that also blows up something mana value 2 or less. So if all your black removal only hits tiny things, you do run into a problem where in the late game you can't deal with bigger threats if all your removals like this. So they're not as good in multiples, but you can definitely play one. And making food or having the option to do this at instant speed, both of those are good. I usually do just fire this off sorcery speed though. I think honestly, even with instant speed removal spells, you probably should do that more often. There's like the hexproof roll, royal treatment that can stop something from getting hit by this. If you do pass your opponent's turn, or maybe they have a sack outlet or an instant speed bargain card if you try to kill their gingerbread or a token or I don't know, like a not gingerbread. What's the other one? Tough cookie or something like that. I don't know. I just find that there's reasons to do this at sorcery speed, and I usually end up doing them. I've kind of buried the lead here. There's a Torch the Tower as our last common, which is obviously just... Yeah, I think universally agreed to be the best common in the set. This card's sick. I mean, sometimes you will bargain just to get the scry, even while killing an X2, just because the scry on like a shock effect is just so strong. I mean, historically, one of the weaker aspects of red decks is that sometimes if you're playing like red-green, you're a little lower on card advantage, right? So getting to scry, making sure you actually find your key pieces early and on time, that's pretty huge on your shock, which is already, this is a 1-mana deal 3 with upside. That being trivial to bargain. So love this card. I don't think there's a comment I would take over it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about. I mean, obviously we talk pretty frequently about, scrying isn't drawing a card, obviously, but I will say that scry is a very nice little tempo addition to a card like this, right? Because it does let you kind of clean up your draw phase for the next turn, and that enables you to capitalize on tempo by killing the creature, and not backpedaling after you've killed this creature. You can kind of capitalize on the momentum you're building by doing that. So yeah, Torch Tower is phenomenal. And if you can't bargain something, it's still a shock. So great.
Yeah. I fired this off as a shock plenty of times. It exiles too, and that does matter in this set sometimes. Just compare this to Feed the Cauldron, right? Feed the Cauldron and Torch the Tower, they probably share like 80-75% of targets, right? I mean, that excluding like counters and stuff, although I guess most augmentations that happen in this format are rolls. I guess some rolls put it outside the range of Torch, but not Feed. I don't know. Still, they share a huge overlap in what they can kill. And Feed costs 3 times as much.
Yeah, so. It's and this is one of the rare cards in the format. Obviously it's common, but I mean it's one of the unique cards in the format where most of the bargain cards, you really need the bargain to make them worth playing. Yeah. And this one, you just don't. Mm-hmm. You can play this whether you've got the bargain or not.
So Torch is excellent, but we've got a bit of a stacked pack. Next up, we've got our ground seal, our enchanting fail or enchanting tail or whatever it is. This is unplayable. I mean, even as a sort of like I don't know. I don't think the bargain decks even always want even a deck that's like got tons of bargain stuff, a bunch of Brave the Wilds, a bunch of like Torch the Towers. I don't think you want Ground Seal even as a 2-mana enchantment that cantrips. Like even the beans do this, right?
Yeah, well, and that's something I think, right? There can be, I could see a lot of players convincing themselves that it's worth playing a lot of these Enchanting Tales cards because, oh, well, I can just bargain it away. But if you're not, like, it's not worth the card in your deck, right? We maybe should do a back to basics episode just on like deck construction and what constitutes the being worth putting a card in your deck, because that is like a real cost. Putting the card in your deck, taking up a slot, is a real cost. And a lot of these bargain effects are relying on the fact that you can generate roll tokens, you can generate rat tokens, you can generate fairy tokens, you can generate food tokens. Those aren't real cards that are in your deck that are taking up slots. They are just kind of incidentally created by other things like a Merry Bards or whatever. And you can get rid of them later because they're not really costing you anything.
Mm-hmm.
Putting grounds in your deck is a real cost. So I feel like to kind of use the, well, I can bargain it away excuse, the card itself needs to do something pretty real. And my brain always goes to hatching plans when we're talking about that kind of thing. That's just like a phenomenal benefit you're getting. Sure, it doesn't do anything when it hits the board, but when you bargain it away, you're going up 3 cards or up 2 cards or whatever it ends up being. So, yeah, Ground Seal doesn't get there for me.
Yeah, I think if we were to make a quick tier list of the 2 drops that you want to be bargaining away, definitely Hatching Plans at the top one. If my opponent casts Hatching Plans, it takes a lot for me to be scared of a 2-mana do nothing, like literal stone cold do nothing. But that one is there. Prophetic Prism is up there too, and Beans are up there too. I think I would rank Seal the lowest out of all of those, and Plans at the top.
Yeah, I don't even think it's close.
Now, we've actually got a card that fulfills a pretty similar role as our first uncommon. This one's maybe even better, though. Welcome to Sweet Tooth. This is the saga. First chapter, you make a 1/1 human. Second chapter, you make a food. Third chapter, you put X 1/1 counters on a creature you control, where X is the number of foods you control plus 1. So you've already got, 2 counters coming from this guaranteed. It is telegraphed, so maybe your opponent holds up their Torch the Tower or Feed the Cauldron to kill whatever you're going to put the counters on. But even if you have like 1 or 2 other ways to make food in your deck, sometimes it'll just happen that the third chapter, this is just put 3 counters on a creature. And when your opponent doesn't have removal, it's brutal. I've seen this just make a 4/4 at random. If you combine this with some of the other premier green uncommons like Gingerbread Hunter or Tough Cookie in this pair super ridiculously well together. There's kind of a theme here. The food vector, it's got some juice.
Yeah, I don't know that I take Welcome to Sweet Tooth over Torch the Tower, though, personally. I haven't really played these green decks, so I don't know how needed this card is. But it's a pretty solid two mana play, right? You're doing this on turn 2. It's a little delayed, but at least you get the creature up front. Yeah, it's a solid card. I still think I just take Torch the Tower, though. And I don't know what the 17 lands data is on these, so maybe the data would say to take Sweet Tooth, but...
this is one of the top uncommons in the set, but then we have Torch, which is one of the top commons in the set, so... Curious to hear what the pick order for that would be. I don't know. Maybe we can hit up all the pros from their Vegas pick orders. We've got an uncommon here that's a little underwhelming in comparison. Boundary Lands Ranger, the 2-mana 2/2. Beginning combat on your turn. If you have a 4-power creature, you get to Rummage. Another card I don't think I've ever seen proc.
Yeah, this is usually just vanilla 2/2 for 2 that I'm just not interested in.
Yeah, it's a neat design. Honestly, could go in the Draft Chaff cube. This is along a couple of our vectors. It kind of flew under the radar at first, but this one might actually work because we have the 4-power vector. We also have a graveyard vector that it kind of touches upon Madness. Red, and Rummaging's pretty good. Yeah, Madness. This is this and what's that worm? That worm that you madness out. It's like a 5-mana 4/4, but you can madness it for 3. That pairs pretty well with this, although I guess nuts. Yeah, the 4-mana. All right. Let's put a pin in that one. This unfortunately is not the Draft Chaff cube. So not really something we want to be picking here. I mean, the red aggressive decks are good, but this is not what you want to be doing. You want to be going wide, making rats. The 4 power stuff, like, it doesn't need the help. Now, could I interest you in a slightly better red uncommon? Maybe an Imidane's Recruiter?
Slightly better. Yeah, Windmill Slam, Imidane's Recruiter. I don't care what the rare is. We're moving on.
Well, are you sure?
I'm just kidding.
What if there's something really good? I mean, it could be one of the 3 to 4 rares that are better than Imidane's Recruiter.
There are only about 4 of them. So yeah, generally speaking, I don't really care what the rare is. I guess we should look at it, but Imidane's Recruiter is a phenomenal card. You don't even have to be red-white for it to be awesome. Even just in a red deck of it paired with anything else, it's really, really good. In a white deck, you're gonna splash red for this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And in white red in particular, you just win every game you cast it, or just
Right.
about. What, you win like 2/3 of the game. We'll chat about the data specifics later, but honestly, given these uncommons and a blind rare, it would absolutely be correct to take Imidane's Recruiter every single time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Recruiter is obviously awesome. And wait a minute, is it our Draft Chaff Hero episode today?
I don't know what you're talking about. What's the rare?
It's a Bramble Familiar. Whatever.
yeah.
I do like this card, and I'm calling this is going to be in contention for your card you most likely want as a pet.
The Bramble Familiar?
Yeah, look at it. It's a cute little raccoon. It's an
It is a
elemental
cute little
raccoon.
raccoon, but there are otters in this set, dude.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. There are a couple otters. So, all right, I take that back. This one's up there, though, for me. This one's pretty cute. Also, bit of a standard all-star. Saw some play at Worlds.
Yeah.
He even has inspired this wacky Cascade Invasion of Alara deck. A pretty key part of that. Fine and limited, too. I found this one especially good if you have other bombs in your deck. You really want big hits with the fetch quest, especially if you're going to be trying to ramp up to it with stuff like Root Rider Fawn. I did play this one in a deck where I had the dragon, the was it Hellkite Scorcher Regent, whatever that thing's called, the 6 mana mythic, which you do want to bargain so that it floats mana. But I mean, even hitting it off Bramble Familiar, I found that to be pretty good. You know, I cast Bramble Familiar for the fetch quest version, found my 4/6 flying haste, and then immediately swung in with it, and that was pretty sick. So this one pairs well with other like 5-6 mana drops. I mean, if you have a Gruff Triplets, you'll get this. But otherwise, it is just the 2 mana 2/2 that taps for green with upside. And that's fine to put in any deck. But I would not take it over Imidane's Recruiter. I'm not entirely sure I would take it over Welcome to Sweet Tooth or Torch the Tower either. It's pretty close. If Imidane's Recruiter wasn't in this pack, between Sweet Tooth, Torch the Tower, and Bramble Familiar, I think that's actually pretty close between all 3 of them. I'm not sure what the data says, but I'm curious to hear what the listener thinks in the Discord.
Yeah, I'm inclined to take, just from a comfort level perspective, again, I haven't played much of these green decks. I would probably take Torch the Tower over the Familiar and the Sweet Tooth just because, again, I'm more comfortable with those decks. But I think I'd take Familiar over Sweet Tooth because it does seem a little more flexible in that it's one of those rare sort of adventure cards that even though it's costed backwards, where the adventure is more expensive than the creature, it actually gives you the ability to play the adventure after you've played the creature because you can give this back to hand and kind of do that. So it just feels right from a curve perspective. I think most green decks would probably rather have the ramp than they would this sort of aggro-esque play from the Sweet Tooth. I really think the Sweet Tooth only seems to fit in like 1 or 2 green decks, and the Bramble Familiar fits into way more.
I think Sweet Tooth is a little better. I think it is just pretty good mid-range, but I haven't been having a lot of success with all my mid-range piles that I've been trying. I think I need to play more best of 3. I think the more I play best of 1, the more I kind of get flattened by streamlined decks. I think I need to do some tuning, between rounds. I do find I perform better in best of 3 overall. I actually have a knock against Bramble Familiar, a quick story time. I was being attacked by a 6/5, and it just a vanilla 6/5. I don't remember the creature or whatever. And I block with Bramble Familiar. You can activate its bounce to hand at instant speed. So I was like, all right, this is sick. I'm going to block with my Familiar, bounce it to hand, fetch quest next turn. This is the same deck where I was playing that and the dragon. And I was like, I only have like 20 cards left in deck. Decent chance to hit the dragon, like a third chance to hit. And then I would just like swing for lethal. I bounced to hand. After I block bounce to hand, my opponent, they use the Werefox to instant speed adventure a monster roll onto their now unblocked 6/5. And I just took 7 lethal trample on the spot. The trample now going through because I didn't have a blocker. So that was rough.
Nice.
But a pretty sick play on my opponent's part. Gotta hand it to him for that one.
Well, and they had the rare too. I mean, the Werefox bodyguard's a rare, so.
Oh no! This was the common that puts a monster roll at instant speed. So
I'm thinking of the bodyguard that like locks stuff down. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they just like gave their now unblocked 6/5 1/1 and trample, and that was enough to kill me. So anywho.
All right, on to our Teferi Tybalt. This is a Roses and Thorns style segment where Ben and I share a high and a low from the past week. I'll slow roll. Ben, what's going on with you this week?
Well, Worlds was pretty cool. I enjoyed watching that. It was fun to see what was happening at the highest levels. You know, always good watching those pros draft. Been learning some modern, learning some standard, trying to pick things up. Look, it's no secret that this isn't my favorite set of all time. I'm still drafting it. Not as much as I would a set that I enjoyed more, but you know, it's fine. The real Teferi that I have from this past weekend, I went to a pawpaw festival. Are you familiar with the pawpaw fruit?
I am not. I thought this was going to be something to do with pets.
No, this sounds like nonsense. I cannot wait to hear if listeners have heard of this in Discord, but it's a fruit. It grows wild in North America. It's called America's like forgotten superfruit, and it's absurd. I went down a rabbit hole with this thing. My brother, who you know, he's a bit of an environmentalist. He likes like growing his own food, and he wanted to get some trees. So we drove 3 hours in a torrential downpour, that hurricane that was up here, which you missed. Lucky you. We like hydroplaned all the way to this pawpaw festival. Thousands of people still came in a torrential downpour for this fruit. Now, the thing is, it has no shelf life. It goes bad instantly. You have to eat it within a couple days of picking it, and it's hard to refrigerate, and you can't stack it because it bruises and dents too easily. So it's impractical to ship. You really have to just pick it and eat it. So most people have never even heard of this thing. You never see them in stores, but they're healthier for you than everything. They have like more potassium than bananas, more vitamin C than oranges. Like they're really good for people, but they're just impossible to get a hold of. So anyway, I went to this pawpaw festival where I learned so much. There were master growers and orchards, and I had pawpaw chutney, pawpaw cookies, pawpaw vodka, everything you can imagine. Anywho. I learned so much. I'm now a diehard pawpaw enthusiast.
So wait, did your brother buy the trees then?
Oh
like,
yeah,
does it grow on trees. I'm guessing. Okay. Yeah,
they do. So hopefully next year they'll be fruiting, and we don't have to drive 3 hours to go to the next one. So my Tybalt this week was that it's cold. It got cold here in the time that you've been gone. It's now going into the 40s overnight, and with the changing weather, I myself have a bit of a cold. Hopefully it's not too audible, but I really don't want to get sick, because being a teacher, getting sick, that somehow means when you take off, it ends up being more work. So hoping to not get sick.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, this time next week will be in the 80s. So
really? All right.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Which probably means I'm going to get sick, because my body doesn't handle drastic changes in temperature very well.
Yeah. Anyway, you have a buried lead to uncover here.
I suppose I do. Yeah, I was away last week. The listener probably wouldn't recognize it because we're good at our jobs, and we got an episode out last week and this week. Though if you're paying attention to the YouTube channel, you'll know that I didn't upload the episode until very late in the week because... Look, I was we had like a massive Wi-Fi outage at the Airbnb I was at, and so like we just lost internet for like 2 days. Which was great because I didn't want to be on my phone or anything, but at the same time, it meant I had a really hard time getting everything posted.
That's a good break to be on, though. Like it's a forced like internet detox. That sounds beneficial in the circumstances you're in.
No, I appreciated it overall. But yeah, the trip was phenomenal. I was gone 8 days in Zion National Park. Well, that's not entirely accurate. The trip was 8 days long, but we did one day in Vegas, a few days in Zion, 1 day at the Grand Canyon. So yeah, it was really awesome. We did all the major hikes. The subway, which is about a 9-mile hike out and back. And it ends in the section they call the subway, where there are like these pools that you can swim through. And at the end of it, there's like a big waterfall kind of thing.
I'm looking it up. I haven't heard of it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really, really cool. The subway part, like probably what you're seeing pictures of, is the very end of it. It's like the last 500 feet or so.
I see why they call it that. And you could just swim in this?
Yeah, you can just swim in it. You have to swim through it. It's too deep to like step through.
Wow.
But it was really cool. I was really disappointed I didn't bring my GoPro on this trip because the footage would have been awesome. But got some good pictures. So we did that the first day. Then we did this other hike called Kanara Falls, which is like a 3.5-mile hike, most of which is up a service road. So it's calling it a hike is kind of a stretch. But that goes kind of up a river, and then there are a bunch of other waterfalls you can see. The downside to that, and Ben, you'll appreciate this because you have a surfing background. The downside was the water was 40 degrees. Ooh, so it hurt.
That's cold.
Yeah, it's really cold. Like it genuinely stung when the water splashed on you, and then you have to walk through it.
That'll kill you.
The falls. So it was very cold. Yeah, and we had one of the guys with us was like, well, you can actually get hypothermia at any temperature below 94 degrees. So, and we were just like, all right, shut up. It's it's cold, whatever. Wednesday we did Angel's Landing, which apparently is one of the most dangerous hikes in the world. That is about 4.5 miles, a little more than 4.5 miles, with 1,800 feet of elevation gain. And most of that is up like switchbacks and stuff.
Oh, I've heard of this one. Yeah, with the chain along the one side, right?
Yeah. So you go up these switchbacks for most of it, and then at the once you get to the part, not the top, but more than halfway up, there's a section where you need a permit to get through. They never used to permit it, but too many people died, so they started permitting it.
Jeez.
And you get a permit, and then you go through this section that is, you're scaling the side of a cliff. You just hold onto a chain, find footholds wherever you can find them, and hope to not fall, basically.
I'm looking at the picture. This looks like even if you are pretty competent at hiking, like if you slip, there's not a lot you can do.
Yeah, well, if you slip, it's all upper arm strength. Like you're just hoping that the chains hold you and you can hold on to the chains until you can get a grip again. But the view at the top of it is breathtaking. I've never seen anything so beautiful. I had to repeatedly remind myself I was still on planet Earth. Like it was
sick.
Incredible. Thursday we went to the Grand Canyon, which is much bigger in person than I expected it to be.
Oh yeah, I've been to that one.
It's huge,
big hole.
Yeah, we were on the North Rim, and I hear the South Rim is more interesting, but still very fun. We went to this place called Horseshoe Bend, which was another kind of cool. It's like a big rock in the middle of a river that makes a horseshoe shape. Also very cool. And then Friday, we did the last of the big Zion hikes called the Narrows, which is essentially, I think it was 8 or 9 miles round trip, about 6 of which is just up and back in a big river. But there's like nowhere to go on the sides. Like you can't, there's no riverbed. It's just canyon walls and you're in a river.
The Narrows, right?
Right. Yeah. So I couldn't find Arkham Asylum, but Dark Knight humor. I guess it's Batman Begins. Anyway, that one was really cool as well. Luckily, the water temperature was a bit more manageable than the Kanara Falls hike. But I'd never done anything like this, so it was really cool. At one point, the water was chest deep, so you're just like trucking through this river. Most of the time, it was like mid shin up to waist, depending on where you were at.
What did you have to wear? Like,
I wore a bathing suit, waterproof hiking shoes, and neoprene socks. So neoprene's kind of, if you're listening and don't know, the neoprene's essentially what they make wetsuits out of, and it's designed to like hold a layer of water close to your body so that your body temperature warms that part of the water up, and then the cold water getting in doesn't really get in because you've got a layer of warm water against your body. That's pretty much all I wore. And then like for the chest high part, I just like picked my shirt and bag up and just kind of like held it above me. It wasn't like a long stretch that was that deep. Maybe only 50 feet or so. And then the rest of it was, like I said, waist to mid shin. But we got there at like 9:45 a.m. and we didn't get home until like 7 p.m. So it was a really long trip, but really awesome. And the weather was phenomenal the whole time. I recognize the rest of the East Coast wasn't doing so hot.
you dodged some good weather here.
Yeah. I've had a good set of trips lately with that. I was in Chicago when like all the wildfire stuff was going on in New York. And then like I was away for this. So yeah, but yeah, the trip was awesome. All that said, my tibble is that I'm kind of exhausted. Like we didn't really take any breaks. So I'm more tired than I expected to be coming home from that, but it's the good kind of exhausted where like this was one of the few trips I've done that I left feeling like I did everything. Like I didn't feel like I missed anything. So I feel really good about that. So I just need to recoup a little bit and I'll be good to go.
Sweet.
All right, on to our listener question of the week. This one's sort of a long one. We've got a little bit of a preamble, but the question comes from Nathan. If you want to submit a question, you can do so in the listener questions channel on the Discord. But Nathan says, the Wildsville drain card, not dead after all, definitely gives a horror movie vibe, specifically where like the killer would come back for one final scare after the survivors think they're safe. Seeing that we're eventually getting a new horror theme set with Duskmore and House of Horror, I wondered if that card may see a reprint there. If so, that would mean the return of aura rolls, because that card generates the roll tokens. Not all of the current rolls really fit thematically into a horror set, so what new rolls would you create to capture the mood?
You know, this is great because, you know, we're starting off spooky season strong. it's what, by the time this episode comes out, basically October. We could call it October close enough, which is one of my favorite times of year. So I watch a lot of horror movies, not so many like jump scary, but I like the more like cerebral, like Jordan Peele style horror. Like Nope is one of my all-time favorites. So I would say there are some tropes that I think we can create roles for. First to die would be one of them, right? Like the one who does something so stupid that it just gets them killed. Maybe not like a patient zero, but more like someone who like goes up to the person who's acting a little weird, who's clearly a zombie, but they're like, "Hey, buddy, what's up with you?" You know, that person, maybe like the fool role. I would say it would have to be like, maybe it gives them vanishing. It gives them like vanishing 2. So they have a couple turns to stick around and then they just, you know, they get sacked, they go away. Maybe like a lone survivor role would be the next, like the opposite end of the spectrum. Could give, I guess Ward is already done. We can't make it too strong with something like hexproof or indestructible. I don't know. How would you make something stick around for a while without making it too busted? Maybe it gains like Defender and Ward 2? I don't know.
So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because then the question could be, can we get away with maybe having functional reprints of roles, but you just change what they're called, right? So like you could still have one that gives +1/+1 in Ward 1, but you just call it's just not called the same thing. To like fit the theme of the set. I don't think Wizards would ever do this, but you could go with, you know, there's a character trope, and I took a horror film class in college, so maybe this isn't common knowledge, but there's like a set of character standards that most horror films follow. So you'll see characters that represent like certain things. You kind of alluded to this earlier. I can't remember all of them, but you could just name them after those. And they're typically, like you said, there's one that's like the first to die. There's one that's like usually the last to die.
The survivor.
Yeah.
There's like the
one
muscle
that has to like encapsulate innocence. So maybe it's something like that. I don't know that Wizards would ever do that like verbatim, but maybe.
I'm almost thinking a lot of these ones have been, a lot of our existing roles have been aggressive and like assertive, right? They all give +1/+1 and something. And because you do them at, I mean, some instant speed, but a lot of them at sorcery speed, it's more of an aggressive slanted mechanic. We didn't see any that would maybe give like +0/+2, right? Like I could see a +0/+2 defender first strike roll. That just, well, that might be too strong, but like then it creates this like brick wall that can't be gotten through. Maybe that's like, I don't know, the doomsday prepper, right? The one who actually is prepared for all this, has the stash of canned goods and bats with nails through them, that type of thing. There's also sort of like the muscle roll. In particular, I'm now thinking of like Train to Busan in particular, which is a great zombie movie. I'm thinking of whatever that guy's name is. Man, I'm blanking on his name, but the muscle, right? So. Oh, you'd like it. It's a good one. The one who kind of partway through, I guess there's also like there's a team of baseball players in that one, and they're sort of like the muscle, like the jocks who kind of take charge and try to push through with baseball bats and such. I definitely think there could be a child role involved somehow. Like, I don't know. I guess we got young hero already. maybe it gets like maybe it gets like -1/-1 to represent like it being a little younger and like flying or something, because it's a little more flighty, or -1/-1 unblockable. I don't know. We could do a whole lore deep dive on this, but I'd be curious to see if they do a trope type mechanic. I don't know if we'll see literal roles again. To be honest, I'm a little down on mechanics that require additional cardboard to explain. That being like this and the ring and venturing into dungeons. I do miss the days of simple sets where you could just, understand everything about the way a card works just by looking at the card itself. And the roles, we're getting a little bit of complexity creep that I don't know. Especially so this set, it hit a particular note for me. I'm going to soapbox for just 30 seconds. Then I'll get down. This set hit like just the right note of complexity creep to bother me a little bit, because it has some very complicated mechanics, and tracking things, tracking rolls is a bit of a nightmare in paper. It's fine on Arena, right? They work similar to counters, but it also whiffs on so many other aspects. So it's both more complex and has less options. Somehow it created more work for you as a player to understand what's happening, but then it kind of pulls back and says, oh, actually, you don't need to understand most of that stuff. This is a more complicated set, but once you actually like understand all of it, there's actually only a handful of things that you should be doing. So all that stuff with tapping and stuff going to the graveyard, you can ignore all that, right? You can just say, okay, I'm going to draft like red beatdown decks, maybe green-black food decks, the occasional 5-color nonsense deck. But like the tapping stuff, the graveyard stuff, the 4-power stuff, none of that means anything. The enchanting tails, like 75% of them are downright bad to put in your deck. And 10% of them are like just okay. So I don't know. The set is very complex with roles, but it just doesn't deliver on the complexity. You know what I've gone past my 30 seconds.
I think I understand what you're saying. I don't know. I honestly think for something like this, they could even just do, I mean, it doesn't solve the complexity problem, but they could just double tap on the monster roll and just make that more specific. So instead of just being like +1/+1 trample, it's like, what kind of monster? Maybe you turn it into a ghost. It changes the creature type, becomes a spirit, gets like +1/+1 and flying or something, like you were saying
cool.
earlier. Maybe it becomes a werewolf and it still gives it trample, but it's like +2/+1 or something. I don't know.
Maybe I'm just secretly upset that they managed to make a fully auras themed set without giving Bruna a single piece of good tech. Because somehow they pulled it off.
All right, let's get on to our main topic this week. And as Ben alluded to earlier, this is our Draft Chaff Hero episode for Wilds of Eldraine. So we're going to talk, I don't think it's any secret. We kind of let the cat out of the bag like weeks ago.
Do the drum roll.
Oh, yeah, we have a drum roll now. We can do that. We have the power.
Listener, while you wait, think about what it might be. What the
All right, here we go.
Draft Chaff Hero might be.
The Draft Chaff Hero for Wilds of Eldraine is Imidane's Recruiter.
Hey, who would have thought? Also trained troops to a lesser extent.
Well, yeah, they do go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Hard to cast one without at least thinking of casting the other. So we've got Imidane's Recruiter here. For those that might not be familiar, it's 2 in a red for a 2/2 human knight at uncommon, a creature, of course. It says Imidane's Recruiter, when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. And it has an off-color adventure, train troops 4 and a white, create 2/2 white knight creature tokens with vigilance. And then, of course, this goes on an adventure and you can cast it later from exile. So just this card as a package, we called this one being pretty solid early on. We didn't know how good this would be. Like, this card is sick.
No, and I think we actually downplayed it a little bit. Ben made the joke in the format breakdown that this was just an expensive heroic reinforcements. And I think I made a joke about it being like an extremely expensive heroic reinforcements. I kind of downplayed it, thinking it wouldn't be as good as heroic reinforcements. And this format, it's just as good, if not better. I don't know if it can be better, but the options of being able to cast it in different decks and things maybe makes it better. Technically, this is a monocolored card if you need it to be, so you can get around like color constraints. And just playing this as a creature in most aggressive decks, especially like the black-red decks that can go really wide really fast. I mean, playing this on turn like 4 as a 3-drop that just buffs your board and swings in is really good. The other thing that I would say is one thing, at least that I didn't catch with this card right off the front, was that when you train troops with this on 5, you make the 2/2/2s. Most of the decks that are playing this card can then play 2-drop Recruiter, give the 2-drop haste, swing with everything. And that's just like, okay, stop.
Yeah. And somehow you always hope that you're like, okay, if they cast trained troops and you're like, all right, I can stabilize as long as they only play the Recruiter and they don't have anything else. And they always have something else.
Of course, yeah. Well, and I even did the math wrong just there. If you hit your land drop, you would play troops on 5, play a 3-drop and the Recruiter on 6.
Yeah.
And that's just game over most of the time. Because then also, again, in the black-red decks, that 3-drop is like a Voracious Vermin that ETBs to make another rat or does something stupid. I guess that one dies into a rat. Whatever. You're making more than one creature, and then your Recruiter is buffing all of them. It just gets very difficult to handle how wide these boards can get with the pump, and then giving whatever else you're playing haste. And obviously the Recruiter itself, too.
Yeah, I once had an opponent go train troops into Pie Wielder plus Imidane's Recruiter.
Oh,
which
no.
that didn't win that game.
No,
but
how would you?
Even without these little mini combos we're talking about, Recruiter is an army in a can, right? I mean, this makes 3 bodies in one card, and historically making multiple pieces of cardboard for one piece of cardboard is good. I mean, how many things in this format can represent 9, or in any format for that matter, can represent 9 hasty power, like just within one card? And this thing is so flexible because it's a 3-drop, it's a 5-drop, it's a 5-drop that curves into this plus something else on the turn after. It's an 8-drop too. Like, you can cast both of these in one turn. I've seen it done, right? Sometimes it does even save the best for last by casting Recruiter after the trained troops. A bunch of 3/2s attacking just so happens to be a solid stat line in this format, where before you get to the like real 4 toughness things, that tends to be like the 4 or the 5 drops, and both red and white have access to some strong removal spells that can easily deal with those. So, sure, you can play this on turn 5, it's good, but you can also just play this on turn 3, right? Just if you need a 3-drop in your red aggressive deck, I mean, just a 3-mana 3/2 haste that also buffs your other stuff. That's always been a good card.
Yeah.
Even without the other stuff attacked onto it. And that's not even saying, like, when you start building to make that buff beneficial, right? Like, when you have 4 rats on the board, we said at the beginning of the format that rats are best when your opponent's at low life total, or when you can augment them and make them like real creatures that your opponent actually has to block and interact with. Nothing feels worse than when they have to trade off their like 2/2 with a 2/1 rat because they're just going to die otherwise, right?
Yeah, and the rats decks have all these other little levers they can pull to make the the rats better as well. So if you've got any of those going before the recruiter hits the board, then it's just that much harder for them to deal with. And I think, a lot of the times these types of cards are good, but they're kind of glass cannon-y in that you swing out math is for blockers. I didn't really check if I'm going to win this turn. Maybe they find a way. They've got a card in hand that lets them interact with the combat math a little bit, and they end up surviving the turn, and then I die on the crackback.
Mm-hmm. This
card makes vigilant creatures, so you don't even have that as an out when you're seeing this again on the other side of the table. So, you just feel awful when this is played against you, no matter what.
Let me tell you, I once had an Esper control deck. I thought it was really cool. I was like, I'm doing it. I've got the prophetic prisms. I had 2 Threadbind clicks in hand. The one with the adventure that kills target tapped creature.
Yeah, and my opponent just laughs at those.
My opponent cast trained troops, and I'm like, how am I going to lose a game where I have 2 Threadbind clicks in hand? I like this is absurd. Like, even just that little extra tick of power attached on these by making them vigilant. I mean, sometimes you just get them with that. Also, this kind of goes without saying, but the 2 knights, when they both enter, that does auto trigger celebration. So You're getting that celebration just right off the bat. And now the 3 mana 2/2, that's not the most resilient body in the world, right? That can die to plenty of removal. But it's the ETB that has a lot of the good value. Sometimes when you cast this, it doesn't matter what they end up killing. Usually they have to point the removal at their biggest thing that's attacking at that point, like a 4/5 or like a 5/4 attacking thing. Sometimes this will even just make it through. And sometimes this thing, you want it to die when you attack with it, because you can just get it back with Return Triumphant, and then it gives all your stuff 1/0 and haste again, and then you attack and put
and
like
trigger celebration again.
Yeah, or even like back for seconds in the black-red decks if you're splashing the white part, or even just playing this as the front half. This card does it all, right? And this card screams Draft Chaff Hero, right? Because this is, let's be honest, this isn't going to see constructed play, not unless something really wacky happens in Standard. I saw those Worlds decks. There's some power flying around. Like, this card is awesome limited, but it's no Atraxa, right? And this card will get left on the draft tables. Poor guy, right? Like, this card is so much fun to play with, so cool to cast, does really unique things, makes these red-white beatdown decks tick, and is kind of the difference between like an okay red-white deck that you're like, I don't know if I'm going to get there all the time. But if you have like 1 or 2 of these things, you're like, my deck is awesome. It's so consistent. I have stuff to do at every point in the curve. And I have this top deck of, I just win now.
It's also a card in a lot of ways that warps the draft format. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'm not necessarily going to make a statement on here. But if you see this passing around the table in any capacity, if anybody passes this to you after pick 1, unless it's like maybe pack 2 or 3, and it's very clear your opponent's not on red or white or anything that would play either of those colors, like, that says a lot about how open either of those colors are in this format. I don't pass this card pretty much ever.
Yeah.
If I'm touching those colors in any capacity, and it will warp the way that you draft the rest of your deck. If you're in like, maybe you're mostly red and you're like not sure if you're building something that's closer to like a red-blue deck with like a spells theme, or a red-white deck with some creatures, and you get an Imidane's Recruiter, like, you just throw all the blue cards away and you're just like, all right, we're doing this, going heavy on trying to pick up as many 2 and 3 drops as I can and make this kind of aggressive thing happen, because Recruiter is just that good, and getting to cast both sides of it is just that much better than getting to cast either of the halves on their own.
I'm at the point in Limited where, I mean, even just in Lord of the Rings, we saw Rally at the Hornburg, which is like a baby recruiter, right? It makes the 2/1/1s, gives your humans haste, has some, similar aspects to this. We've also seen Heroic Reinforcements overperform. This is, I think these 3 are siblings, right? We've got the baby brother, we've got the middle child, and then this is the older brother coming in to show him what's done. Honestly, I think I'm going to start looking at effects like this with, a little more respect almost. And the next time we see a card in Limited that makes multiple bodies, gives them haste, and maybe pumps them, or some combination of those aspects, I think it's time to take these cards slightly more seriously, which is already pretty seriously, right? Like you look at Rally and you look at Heroic Reinforcements and you go, that's a good rate. Like you're getting your mana's worth. But I think now it's time to start looking at these as, oh, this could be one of the best cards in the set. Like just look at how all three of these have been some of the top performing cards in their format. And that's just what they do every time. Like a version of this effect has never been printed to my knowledge where it wasn't highly effective in its format.
Yeah, none come to mind for me either.
So let's chat data. Thanks to 17 lands data, we have a pretty good idea of just how good Imidane's Recruiter is. And right now, by game in hand win rate, we have the top couple cards in the set. Right now, Gruff Triplets is still at the top with a nearly 70% win rate at 68.9%. Below that, Virtue of Persistence, the Black Virtue Mythic, 66.5. Redcap Gutter Dwellers, the format of 3/3 that makes rats, and you can sack stuff to free cast and put counters at 64%. Then the Realm Scorcher, the Big Dragon, Fawn's Bane Troll, 63. Lord Skitter, Virtue of Loyalty a little below that. And right there at number 8, there it is, Imidane's Recruiter, just below some of the top mythics and rares in the set. So only of 7 cards, a very short list, and mostly mythics that you would take over this Draft Chaff Hero.
Yeah, pretty surprising, and it's above Horned Lockwhale, which if you've gotten to play with that card, you know how amazing that can be.
Yeah, that's sick.
And honestly, I mean, it's not entirely surprising, but it has dropped a little bit. It was at top 4 early on in the format.
Yeah,
but still very handily in the top 10, and I don't expect it to drop out of the top 10 before the format rotates off Arena. It's incredible to see a card like this doing so well against, in the company of these mythics and rares, because these are really game breaking rares and mythics in a lot of ways. I mean, most of these are very grown testy where you're just like, oh, they have that. And Imidane's Recruiter follows suit, right? It's it's another one where you see them play that and you're just like, of course, except it's an uncommon, so everybody's got one.
I may have mentioned this on the show before, but I had a game where my opponent cast the front half, Train Troops, and then I untapped, played a Gruff Triplets, and I was at 2 life. They untapped, played the Recruiter itself, swung, and I was forced to block every single one of the Recruiter with every single part of the triplets, and it fully traded. This card, I watched it with my own eyes, fully trade with a Gruff Triplets. And that says something, right? That's a niche case that won't come up too often, but that is a pretty cool data point to have. And they ended up winning the game from that point. They were playing red and I wasn't. So interestingly here, if you sort by games drawn win rate, so games in which you drew it not in your opening hand, it's actually number 4 in the set, but it's number 17 by opening hand win rate. So to me, this kind of implies that it's best when you get to, and look, this is me just hypothesizing off of this observation from the data. I'm hard to say for sure, but my hypothesis is that it's best to cast Trained Troops before casting the Recruiter itself, because in games in hand, in your opening hand, most people will probably end up playing it out turn 3, turn 4 as the Recruiter side, right? And it's still fine there, right? I mean, 3 mana, 3/2 haste that maybe buffs your other things if you're on the board. Good card. But clearly it's when it's drawn in the late game that it just breaks a stall wide open, or it helps you stabilize against maybe a beatdown deck that, and then you start attacking with Vigilance, and then you cast the other half, and then you get a bunch of damage in, and then that makes your other aggro cards all turn on again in a spot where maybe they'd gotten shut off because you'd fallen behind. So this card does seem to ironically do a little better in the longer games in the red-white deck, where it comes off the top, helps you push through the black-green decks, mid-rangey threats. So really cool card, even within this red-white vector.
Yeah, and I think, I had similar observations or similar thoughts with this data, right? If I'm seeing that, what that's telling me is too many people are playing it on 3 or somewhere close to that as a 3-drop and getting in for, maybe they're lucky and they go 1-drop, 2-drop, Imidane's Recruiter, get in, 3 extra damage, and that's fine. But historically, these types of effects, heroic reinforcements, even rally, and obviously recruiter as well, these cards perform best when you have as wide a board as possible and you're pressuring your opponent's life total such that if they don't block, they die. And
yeah,
right, because these don't give trample, so they need to make good blocks, and you need to kind of have enough creatures on board to still get through even when they do their blocks. So yeah, definitely seems like a card that you would want to play later, and I'm glad to see the data supporting that.
Notably, it has an average last CNAT of 3.05. So on average, this card, it does go around some. Like, it's not always getting taken out of every single pack it's seen in. It's not some obscene rare like that you can splash right away. And yeah, sometimes you're off vector, right? I mean, if you're playing super dedicated black-green, I have actually splashed this card in black-green, but there might be like a gingerbread hunter in the pack, and you might be like, well, I don't need Imodane's Recruiter. It's not the most on vector. So sometimes it will come around, right? In pack one, that's maybe a little less common, but it does make it a little further than some of the other rares in the set. So do keep your eyes open for this, and know that, as Zach mentioned earlier, it can influence your draft decisions.
Yeah, and then also I'll just throw out again, like we mentioned, this is, in terms of games in hand win rate, this is 8th on the list, which means there are only 7 cards above this numbers wise that you should be taking first pick. Which means most of the time just take Imodane's Recruiter if you open it.
Yeah, it's rarely wrong. Now let's chat about some of the vectors that this card shows up in. Not a very extensive list. It's not one of the more flexible Draft Chaff heroes we've had, but look, it's powerful, right? Red-white is obviously the best home for this. So this is the second best vector in the set, this red-white beatdown deck. It's a little lower, at least literally red-white, as a color pair. It's a little below black-green at the moment, according to the 17 lands data. It's a very strong vector, though. I mean, it's one of the top. It's number 2. I do think this makes sense, though. I mean, you've been playing like a red-white food deck or red-white deck, and you come across the food deck, and you're like, well, shoot, this one might actually be a tougher matchup, where red-white can excel against something like blue-red or blue-white or these other nonsense decks that don't really get there. This card is good at any point on the curve, and it can even sometimes get you out of some color jams. I had a case where my red-white deck, I drew only planes, and I actually ended up casting the back half of this, and it helped stabilize me. I'd cast some other white cards before that. I didn't just straight up die. But, you know, this sort of, it has a bit of that. Being able to cast either half can sometimes help you make sure you cast a card just to get something on board and affect the game in a way that, you know, maybe if this was just a red or just a white card, you might not have been able to.
Yeah, I think also, obviously, trigger Celebration on the front half. It's pretty easy to trigger Celebration on the creature half as well, because you can, as we were talking about before, double spell with it. Those triggers in the red-white deck are hugely important as well for getting the value you need out of the cards that you're putting in the deck. You know, things like the Pie Wielder or
the mice, the Celebrant, the 2-drop.
Yeah, there's the Celebrant, there's the Flyer, which is higher up on the curve, so you don't necessarily see a lot of those in these decks, but there's also the red one that gives something menace, right? Like there are a lot of
the
powerful
brawler
celebration card. Yeah, the brawler guy, yeah. Really powerful celebration cards that this card in itself can help trigger twice, which is backbreaking in some of those decks.
Yeah, that's true. This is kind of like 2 celebration triggers in a can. Notably, the tokens that are made here, you don't really want to be sacking these, but sometimes, I mean, they're real enough creatures that sometimes they'll have a pacifism put on them. Maybe you put like a roll on it, they pacify it, then you top deck your, Torch the Tower, right? And then you go, okay, well, now I have another out. So the fact that this makes tokens isn't irrelevant. And obviously the mass pump trigger is great in red-white, because red-white tends to go pretty wide. It's playing 1-drops like Ginger Brute, Harried Spearguard, that type of thing. Or maybe even creatures that have been jumped, things with flying, like Princess Takes Flight will pump something that turn. You could set it up where you fire an Archon's Glory off, sacking something, and then the little buff helps you chip in for more damage. And of course, this deck just can go wide with rats too. If you're touching red enough with like the Rat Catcher trainee, and you're just making a bunch of things on the board, then just going super wide, that'll just close out games. Sometimes you wind up in like a messy Naya mid-range pile. This is sort of a vector to itself. But like red, green, green, white, these decks can both get away with running this card still along the more aggressive vector, not really going for the late game, big mana type of deal. And then you typically splash one half or the other of this. If you're adjacent to either half, I think you should try to play it and splash for it somehow. There's easy ways to splash even among the mana bases. The beatdown decks don't always want prophetic prisms, but like a Crystal Grotto or the red-green decks can play the Fawn, right? So I think the Naya aggressive vectors can take this one pretty highly too.
Yeah, and you sometimes will end up incidentally with cards in those decks that care about the 5 mana value or greater thing, and this the Train Troops does trigger that. You won't see it as frequently or actually want it as frequently in those decks. The vectors are way off from the 5 mana matters versus like what Imidane's Recruiter is actually trying to do. But, sometimes you'll get incidental value from it as well.
And finally, you can splash this card. Both halves are somehow splashable. Now, in these like splashy, big blue, green, black piles, where you're playing like prophetic prisms, hatching plans, you're taking tons of cheap removal, and then just good card like interaction bombs. This counts as a bomb because this is just an efficient rate, right? And you can usually splash the prophetic prism-esque. You only need the one pip, right? So a prophetic prism gets through there instantly. Same with a Fawn or a Crystal Grotto, or even an Evolving Wilds, or if you have to go get a basic with like Brave the Wilds or something. So I've splashed this in like my, mid-rangey late game, but those types of prophetic prism decks. Honestly, a prophetic prism in a dream. That's all you need to cast this, and then you just do the same thing, right? It's an army in a can. You cast the front half, the back half, and then boom. Take it, play it, win. This card is straightforward.
All right, so before we kind of wrap up the Draft Chaff Hero portion of this episode, because we do want to kind of talk about a few other ancillary things, we do like to usually go through some runners-ups that, in another world where Imidane's Recruiter didn't exist, these cards might have made the cut. So Tough Cookie's the first. That's the 1 green 2/2. Food Golem at uncommon, ETB, create a food, and then it has a couple of activated abilities. 2 and a green, target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 4/4 artifact creature until end of turn. Or, of course, because it's also a food, you can pay 2, tap it, sack it to gain 3 life.
Yeah, this card's a beater. I have done this on turn 5 where I had a previously existing food, just cast Tough Cookie, activated my previous food, swing in for 4 with haste. It's a huge swing. I mean, it plays offensively, it plays defensively. Tough Cookie does it all. Really strong card. And all of these, by the way, all of these runner-ups are performing very well on 17 lands as well. But they do all, fall in comparison to the Recruiter. As a side note, we do not just pick Draft Chaff Heroes based on whatever uncommon has the top 17 lands leaderboard stats. Incidentally, sometimes that's what's true, but we're a little more creative than that. I just love the way the Recruiter is very on our vibe.
Yeah, we've also used the data in the past as a tiebreaker. If Ben and I are disagreeing about a particular Draft Chaff Hero, the data will often be a tiebreaker. And if we can't really figure out what the Draft Chaff Hero should be, then we also kind of tend to go to the data. We didn't need to do that for this set, but
this one just had the vibe.
Yeah, just to circle back too on the Tough Cookie, the crucial bit for this for me is that it gives you a non-creature artifact to start, and then that activated ability is at instant speed. So to your point, you can use it defensively. It's very versatile in that way. And then obviously, what are they supposed to do? Like point removal at this thing? Then you just sack it and gain some life. You know what I mean? It's a little
Did they
bit of
kill
tricky...
your animated food?
It's like
trade with it. Like, do you want to trade are you interested in trading your 4/4 for my food token?
Right. And then the other thing too is it's not like the artifact loses its abilities. It just becomes a creature, so you can still sack the food in response to any removal.
This card's sick. Similar, we've got Gingerbread Hunter, the 5 mana, 5/5 ETB make a food that also has Puny Snack. The 2 and a black, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. This being an instant has been great. I mean, these types of -/ effects are great for either killing a creature straight up or blanking a fight spell, blanking a pump spell, blanking a combat trick, or even just shrinking a creature mid-combat. Really strong effect. And then a 5-mana 5/5 with ETB, kind of gain a bunch of life, make a food relevant for bargaining. This card hits a lot of vector points too, for what the big green-black decks want to do.
Yeah, it's a little expensive on the puny snack side, right? Like we're used to an effect like this being like a 1-mana enchantment, something like Deadweight.
Yeah, that's true.
Which in this set actually would have been pretty wild to have an enchantment that did that. I guess we got Stab Wound, but
Deadweight would have been great for the enchanting. What were they?
Yeah, we got Stab Wound. We got Stab Wound.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still phenomenal. I mean, it's overcosted, but it's attached to a creature that you can use later. It's an instant. So I think overall very worth having. And a lot of the black-green decks feel like they actually feel the loss when Gingerbread Hunter's not in the deck. So next up, we've talked about it before, Hatching Plans, 2-mana do-nothing enchantment. But obviously with all the bargain floating around in this set, it's actually a lot more than that because when it goes to the graveyard, you draw 3 cards. It does have to go to the graveyard from the battlefield, so any of the mill effects in the set aren't going to help you get there with Hatching Plans. But
that would be sick if it could.
Yeah, when your opponent just plays the Hatching Plans on 2, you just know they've got the bargain cards to do it because nobody plays Hatching Plans if they can't get rid of it.
They always have it.
And it's not hard. Like, you don't have to play bad cards in the format to make Hatching Plans good. This is just a good card in the format. And 2-mana draw 3. I'll take it.
Good card. I was just wondering about the art, though. Is the implication that the dragon sees the thief taking the egg and is like, it's fine, it's going to hatch later, and then it's going to get you? Does the dragon just not really mind? Does the thief know the dragon sees? I mean, that dragon is right there.
Yeah, well, going just by the art, I think is a little bit difficult to find that answer. The flavor text, though, kind of implies that the dragon's just going to hatch and then eat her.
Yeah, I would personally, if I was a dragon and one of my eggs was being stolen right out under my nose,
just eat the person.
You would just eat the person, right? I don't know. Maybe this is more fun. Look, it's a blue enchantment. Who are we to speak to the reason of a blue do nothing enchantment? And finally, here in our runner-ups, we've got Welcome to Sweet Tooth. This one is awesome, and honestly up there in contention with Immodane's Recruiter for Mythic Uncommons for the set. This one does a lot. It makes so much. You can bargain many different aspects of it. By itself, basically at worst, it's a 2-mana 3/3, right? At floor, unless your opponent is interacting somehow. Over 2-mana 3/3 ETB to make a food. 2-mana 3/3 ETB to make a food. That would just be a ridiculous card. And you have to be patient, but this does do that with a little bit of marginal upside here and there from like sacking the token to bargain, the human or the food, or maybe you have other food to get more counters, or maybe in response to one of the triggers, you sack Welcome to Sweet Tooth to get like an extra bargain thing. There's lots that you can do with this card. It just plays out really well every time.
All right, on to some miscellaneous topics. Obviously, there's a huge event last week. I happened to be in the area, but wasn't actually there, so that's a little unfortunate. But
I was wondering about that. Were you in Vegas at the same time as this was happening?
So, sort of. I flew into Vegas the week prior, so I got there on a Saturday, like a week before the event. But then we left to come home on a Sunday, so I was technically there on the last day of Worlds. But
that's like the airport day, though. It probably wouldn't have been able to stop by.
Yeah, no, I didn't make it to the convention hall or anything.
I wonder if you flew back with anyone. Maybe
I
even
did try
unknowingly.
to pay attention on the. Yeah, I tried to pay attention on the flight, but I didn't recognize anybody. So I think I was flying too early because my flight left at noon at that time, so they were probably still in the middle of playing.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun to watch. I love watching a high level draft. Nothing like having Paul Cheon and Marshall Sutcliffe commentate a draft at the highest level. That's just good watching right there. There were some interesting overperformers. Some of the pros drafted blue, white decks that did really well. Some of the 3-0 decks from both days 1 and 2 weren't the strategies you'd expect to see performing well based on 17 lands data. The deck lists are kind of hard to find. I didn't have a lot of luck even just looking them up online myself. A lot of them are floating around on Twitter, though, so maybe I'll do my best to retweet any of the ones that kind of pop up with the main Draft Chaff account. So keep an eye out for that. And
I will say
there are some.
It's an interesting dichotomy that we get with events like Worlds or the Pro Tours or any of these high level televised events, because very few, unless you're drafting like FNMs or you're going through like these circuits, most people aren't drafting in pods anymore. Like pod draft isn't really a thing.
That's true
for the vast majority of people. So the decks that are underperforming, and 17 lands isn't tracking pod drafts, it's tracking our arena drafts. So the 17 lands data is generally not, I think, as effective when we're looking at in-person pod drafts, because
that's a good point.
What's opened at the pod matters a lot. So yeah, a blue-white deck could do very well in a pod setting.
Yeah, that's true. So there was another big announcement about Standard. I mean, the showdowns are coming back. Standard showdowns were a lot of fun.
I'm just kidding.
Look, I remember playing Standard showdowns back when I had my beloved green-white Seasons Pass deck. That was fun because that was just like my homebrew nonsense, bringing it and then just jamming it against like these meta decks. Like it was fun. And it's Standard, so it's a slightly lower barrier of entry than, I don't know, Legacy, Vintage, those types of things. Even Cube can be a little intimidating, even for like a seasoned limited player. But as seasoned limited players, we know all the cards in Standard, right? Like we've drafted all of them. So it's usually pretty easy to port from limited into Standard because, you know, we know a lot of the interactions. We might not know the decks, right? There's some really cool ones this time around. Domain, Ramp, Blue-White Soldiers, Esper Legends is still kicking, you know, Sheoldred, all that stuff. Whatever. I don't care for the Esper Legends, but there's some cool decks, and I'm excited to figure out which white beatdown strategy is the best. Maybe it's Soldiers, maybe it's Humans. Look, I'm going to put 4 Adeline in the deck and just see what happens next.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that they skipped rotation this time around too, because they're changing the way rotation works. I don't know if we have the details on that yet, but if we do, we can throw them in the show notes for the folks who get those. But yeah, I mean, skipping rotation kind of changes things up in terms of, you know, what's available to play with, the types of decks that are able to be made. Ben made a comment in the pre-show that, you know, some of these decks, I think the Soldiers one you were just referring to, very close to Pioneer, because we've got a lot of sets available to us right now in Standard. So pretty interesting. But we'll see how things shake out. I'm not so sure that I'm going to jump into Standard. Maybe on Arena I will, because I don't have to buy into anything, but we'll see. Yeah.
The barrier of entry knowledge wise is lower, and the cost is lower too. I mean, there's good Standard decks for $100-$200 depending on how much you want to put out for it, and there's some high level play incentives too. There's the Magic Fest in Chicago is going to have a Standard open similar to the limited 100K that was happening in Vegas. The RCQ season, the third part of the season from January to March, that's going to be in Standard. So look, I'm jamming RCQs. I'm going to play in those. I guess I got to pick a good Standard deck by January. And then the regional championship, that's going to feature Standard as well. Plus the next Pro Tour will be Standard. So a lot of Standard coming up. They're juicing it up. And I guess I got to play Standard. You know, I said I'm learning Modern, but the Standard meta, it's pretty interesting too. Look, I can play against Up the Beanstalk Leyline Binding in Modern. I can play against it in Standard. I just get to pick my poison. Also kind of curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts on the Draft Chaff Cube inclusions from this set. There are a couple that I've been looking at. One is what is it called? Like the 8 mana green spell with Bargain, where you get to look at the top like 20 cards, put 2 into play. That could be a cool big mana sorcery for our big sorceries deck. That one we mentioned earlier, the Borderlands Ranger, whatever that thing is that a different card?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. That could go pretty well. But again, it's kind of similar to Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of parasitic aspects of this set. Things with roles don't tend to play very well with other things. And without a dedicated vector, I mean, look, the vectors in this set didn't work. So it's not very likely that they're going to work with other even more streamlined vectors. But I don't know. You folks that listen, you know our cube. It's sick. It's a lot of fun. And some of you have even built it yourself, which is so cool. And I'm curious to hear what listeners think about, any standout cards from the set that you might think might be fun, worth playing in Cube. And Madane's Recruiter could be looked at. We'll see if the white-red deck needs it. Honestly, I don't think it needs the help. White-red has been doing pretty well in our Cube. And last but not least, we've got some exciting developments for our show coming up. I don't even want to say too much. I hate spoilers, and I hate to spoil this, but big things are a-coming. Tied to the Patreon, tied to some of the changes that we're making. But, this is I think we've got a big, not an overhaul. Maybe that's not the right word, but a big, I don't know. It feels refreshing.
Bit of a facelift. Yeah,
a facelift. That's a good way to say it. A big refresh, and I've never been more excited for what we've got going on with the show. So
yeah, totally.
Cool things are coming.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be a fan of the show. It's an exciting time to be part of the show, which if you're a patron, you absolutely are. If you're in the Discord, you're absolutely part of the show. So
to the three people that always like my Twitter posts, you especially are part of the show.
One of those is me. But yeah, exciting things coming. We'll of course be continuing to roll out details and kind of talk with you about those changes as we get more and more concrete details on them. But hey, what's life without a little hype? With that said, if you are not already there, do jump in the Discord. We would love to have you over there. Again, we've got channels for just about everything, every limited format, most of the constructed formats, and some random ones too, just for non-MTG talk as well. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so on Patreon, again, at patreon.com/Draft Chaff Pod. Again, kind of under construction right now, so if you actually won't be able to join if you're listening around when this episode releases. If you're listening to this well into the future, then go check it out. We also have a store, so you can check that out at shop.draftchaff.com and pick up some Draft Chaff merch. If you want to support the show, that's another good way to do it as well. And you can find us on Twitter at Draft Chaff Pod. Thanks, folks, and we'll catch you next week.
Okay, real quick. It is the start of October, more or less, by the time this episode drops.
Sure.
So that is officially my favorite time of year, spooky season. It is the best. I love the fall. I love everything about the aesthetics. I am pumped to go to corn mazes and pumpkin picking and the usual that type of stuff. I've already got my squash, a massive butternut squash that I use as decoration for a couple weeks because those things last forever. And then I turn it into a giant soup. And the real thing I want to know, I've got, a month to figure this out, but I am curious if the listener has any recommendations for me for a good Halloween costume. Because funny enough, my girlfriend and I, we already have one picked for, outside event. We're going to go as the album cover of Fleetwood Mac Rumors. Because if you think about it, I've got the hair, the ponytail. It's a pretty iconic image. We just need like a stool or something for me to put my leg up on. She's got like the long flowy. It'll be cool. It's going to work. I just need like a button up, like a vampire type. He's not a
great
vampire,
album too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nonstop, no skips. But I need something for school. And let's be honest, high schoolers would not get that. I also cannot bring my girlfriend into school to make it work. So I need something else. Right now, I've been toying with a couple ideas. I'm considering Finn from Adventure Time because I have a bunch of students that have told me they like Adventure Time this year, and I love that show. So that'd be kind of cool, a cool thing to go as. I'm open to suggestions. I'm considering maybe the human token from Wilds of Eldraine. Just kidding. They don't know what that is. So I don't know. What can someone with long hair do for Halloween? What, you got any costumes in mind?
Do I have costumes in mind? I don't even know that I'll be at parties, so
you got to go out as something. You're in Hoboken. That place is great for going out on Halloween.
I know. I'm just too introverted. I haven't thought about it. There was something that came to mind, like just spur of the moment came to mind maybe a week or two ago, and I was like, oh, I should remember that because that could be a good costume idea. And then I forgot about it, so I don't know what that was. I will say, though, as we're getting into spooky season, I have already started my annual rewatch of Stranger Things. So that's going nicely. I think I'm midway through season 1. And I can't wait for that show to finish. But I don't know. If you're watching on video, listener or viewer, whether that's through Spotify or on YouTube, you'll get an idea of what we both look like. So you can let us know in the Discord what a fitting costume might be.
I think I have one rec for you. Okay. I think right now you got a bit of a Doctor Strange thing going on.
I got the gray on the sides. I've got the like goatee thing. I don't think I can grow the goatee in full enough to make it like as crisp and clean as him. I guess I could pencil it in or something. But that's not a bad idea. And it kind of fits the aesthetic of like the art that we had drawn up for our MTG character versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.